Morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining us for this session of the small-scale PPP of the World Association of PPP Units and the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe program. UNECE and WAP are very proud to be presenting this program to the PPP community because we think it is really important and it is the way to achieve the SDGs eventually. Without small-scale PPPs, we will not be able to make much headway in achieving the SDGs. We have had in this program several sessions to date. We have discussed what is the definition of small-scale PPPs that we are adopting. We have discussed what are the hurdles, what are some of the potential solutions. We've discussed the legal aspects, and we have discussed some case studies. We have had 2 sessions on case studies, and this is the third and last one at this point in time for case studies. Of course, the program continues for several other sessions. We have about another 15 sessions coming up, including some in French and maybe in Spanish eventually. So do stay tuned. Next week, we have a session in French, and then the week after, we go back to our normal bi-weekly programming in English. So this program has become really the focus of the entire PPP community in that field. We are very delighted to have with us today 3 speakers that are very distinguished, that have a lot of experience. Each one of them is an expert that has done many transactions already. But let me start out by introducing our moderator for today, Mr. Kieran Malley. Kieran is a mechanical engineer with an MBA and 20 years of experience in infrastructure finance, PPP, and policy. He played various roles: a government officer, a PPP advisor to government agencies, head of policy advocacy with infra developers, and head of finance for real estate projects, as well as part of infra private equity funds. His focus for the last few years has been dedicated to impact investments. Kieran's wider industry experience across different infrastructure projects is paramount to addressing implementation challenges. He is currently working at the intersection of PPP and impact financing, and Kieran is co-chair of the WAP Sustainability and Resilience chapter. Kieran, it's wonderful to have you with us. I will give the floor to you to introduce our panelists and continue the webinar from there on.
Thank you, Ziad, for the introduction and warm welcome. Hello to all here. My warm greetings to everyone. My name is Kieran Malley, as Ziad mentioned, and I'm privileged to lead today's discussion. Hearty welcome to all our distinguished panelists here and also the participants joining from almost across the world. Today's session is dedicated to the practical application of small-scale PPPs, examining case studies that illustrate these partnerships in action. We have with us a panel of seasoned professionals who will present these case studies and engage in a thorough discussion, offering their specialized insights and analysis. I encourage everyone to participate actively, as your questions and observations will significantly enrich the collective learning experience for all of us. Please feel free to post your queries and comments in the question and answer section of your screen. And also you can utilize the chat feature to connect with the fellow attendees and exchange the ideas. I will start with the first case study presentation. Our David Dodd is going to be the first panelist here to take that lead. David Dodd is an international thought leader in sustainable economic development, disaster recovery, public-private partnerships, climate adaptation also. David has worked across 47 countries on 4 continents. He served as a dean of the University of Oklahoma Economic Development Institute and is founding CEO of the International Sustainable Resilience Center. which is a strategic partner for WAP. David has expertise in all areas of economic development and economic resilience. He is a certified economic developer, fellow member, and honorary life member of the International Economic Development Council. Over to you, David. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karan. And it's a real pleasure to be here with everyone today. As Karan said, my specialty is climate adaptation, disaster resilience, disaster recovery, all with through an economic lens. The involvement of public-private partnerships in disaster recovery and resilience is widespread and has been for several years. I'm going to talk about a specific case study that involves my home state of Louisiana, my neighboring state of Texas, and a real innovative idea that actually caused the Federal Emergency Management Agency in the United States to change its policy regarding shelters after disasters. As we know, the philanthropy plays a huge role in disaster recovery and in, again, climate adaptation. And what I'm going to talk about is as they say, 4P, a public-private philanthropic partnership, small scale, that was utilized after a hurricane hit the very, very southern tip of Texas. And as I will tell you, the demographics of that area are very similar to any developing country. And then we were able to utilize that in Louisiana, and that's how FEMA, as we call it, changed their policy. So PPPs, 4Ps, are especially needed in disaster recovery because often there are not simply enough federal or local resources. So in this particular case study, we're talking about that structure on a small scale that made a big difference. And if you're interested in philanthropy and public-private partnerships, please check out the chapter on philanthropy. We have a very active chapter in that regard. We work closely with them in sustainability and resilience. I'm co-chair along with Kalan of that chapter, and we certainly would love your participation. So let me go back. I'm having a little bit of trouble. In spring of summer of 2016, Louisiana was flooded. Almost the entire state was flooded. And we had a huge problem. We already had a shortage of affordable homes in Louisiana, and that's happening everywhere now. But it certainly hurt us in that regard in having so many homes destroyed and people that did not have the money just to go, build another one. So we, in the worldwide, the loss of homes in disasters is astounding. The number of homes that are lost because of disasters. And we certainly understand that in developing countries, this is even a worse problem. But the Federal Emergency Management Agency of the United States found a successful effort on the Texas-Mexico border, as I said. And after a hurricane hit that area, a group came together, two housing nonprofits that are dedicated to affordable housing. The Federal Emergency Management Agency and the Federal Housing and Urban Development Agency, along with the Texas State Land Department, which is responsible for administering funds after disasters. They all came together and they found that this neighborhood of only 20 homes, again, this was not thousands destroyed, but the 20 that were destroyed were all of low-income people. Most of them owned their homes. Some of them rented their homes, but they were all unable to just turn around and rebuild. So the idea was to provide them with a shelter that in turn could be converted into a home. And this shelter, the total cost before it was converted to a home was about $20,000. Additional funding to convert it to a full-fledged family home, usually 2 to 3 bedrooms, was $76,000, and that compares with homes that are built from the ground up that are now, in the U.S. probably $200,000. But these are pre-assembled. They're shipped to the site on rail cars or trucks, and then they are put together. That forms the shelter. The shelter is only 680 square feet, but it's enough for a family to survive and live until they are able to then convert that to a permanent home. So the way it was structured is the shelter is given to the family. The family can use that shelter as equity in arranging for financing to buy the rest of the home. And the banks in the area participated in this. They worked with these people to get them into the homes, to get the financing for them. They educated them on budgeting and finance so that they were able to make their payments. And of the 20 homes that were rebuilt, and this was about 10 years ago, all of them are still occupied by their owners, and there's been a noticeable improvement in the aesthetics of the neighborhood because there's nothing like the pride of owning your own home. And that's also an investment for them. The other thing that's really important to know is that these homes are built to withstand up to 150-mile-an-hour winds. That's basically a Category 3 hurricane, and even they could be resistant to tornadoes, which is another weather issue in the U.S. And the other thing that's the most important thing is that these homes again cost $20,000 for the shelter. And what FEMA normally does is they provide mobile homes. Those mobile homes cost $125,000 a piece to purchase, set up, and equip. So you're talking about a huge savings of taxpayer dollars. You're talking about active involvement of philanthropy, the philanthropic sector, the private sector in making these homes, in these shelters into really nice homes. And you can see the photos of them. This is where they start with the pre-assembly. Then they take those pieces and put them together and assemble them into a temporary shelter. This is a photo on the lower left of counseling that the homeowners receive so that they are equipped and have the ability to successfully own, maintain, and pay for a home. And then the bottom right is the end result. This showed FEMA that there is a way beyond buying $125,000 mobile homes that generally don't last more than 10 or 15 years for people to have permanent homes. They made an exception. The policy that FEMA had was they would not compete with the private sector. So they would not allow provision of homes, but they would allow, and this is where they made an exception, provision of shelter. And that's where the shelter units come in. And then they said, whatever people do after that is up to them. So it's really made a sea change in the way FEMA operates in the U.S. And this could be applied in any country, anywhere, because again, the principles are, they're universal. So again, families can move in less than 2 weeks if the components are already there. So that's why they call it rapido, which is Spanish for rapid in English, because it's a rapid process. Sometimes FEMA mobile homes take up to a month to 6 weeks. People are living in hotels, literally, in inexpensive hotels. It's not a very good place for a family. So this has really helped in a lot of different areas. And again, the total cost for the shelters and then converting them to homes for those 20 homes was $1.44 million. That's a very small PPP, but it's been very effective. And this can be scaled up, obviously, depending on the need. The people that put this together now can provide guidance for those that want to try to implement this. And I'm happy to connect anyone with them because they have really done a fantastic job in this innovation. That's my contact information. I'm very happy to be here and more than happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for that insightful and practical application of the PPP plus philanthropy. I can now move over to our next presentation in the series, and I will introduce now Nasser Fares Masood. He is the founder and MD of Concept Realization. He has over 29 years of PPP experience covering strategy, project preparation, transactions, and monitoring. Nasser is a member of the board of directors of PIF's Kingdom Health at Jordan. He is also the chair of WAP's social sector PPPs and a member of the MENA chapter leadership team. Over to you, Nasser.
Thank you, Kiran. Let's share my screen. Okay. So what I want to talk to you about is the use of something called Program PPPs, and some of you may have come across this term, as a method for delivering small-scale PPPs. And this is actually a case study from a project I did with Shamerdan Shikanayev, who is on the call with us as a presenter. We did this project going back a few years now in Kazakhstan as a way of accelerating and bringing forward the ability to implement primary healthcare in Kazakhstan. Just before I go on, I'll quickly introduce Shamerdan. Shamerdan is a partner in law firm Grata. You'll see the logo on the bottom there. When I met him, he was running the project finance team in Almaty. He's since moved to Hong Kong, but of course still very active in the PPP space. And he wrote many papers and participated in many transactions in relation to PPPs in Central Asia. So the key thing is that primary healthcare in Kazakhstan is hugely underutilized. As you can see there, the proportion of GPs amongst healthcare professionals is about half what it should be based on OECD averages, and the number of visits that people pay to primary healthcare clinics is 2.7 compared to 6.7 as an OECD average. That actually reflects that something that maybe some of you who are in less developed countries will also experience, that people generally don't take their healthcare needs to primary healthcare clinics. They prefer to go to emergency departments and hospitals or to see specialists. So what we were mandated to do was to look at developing this program, PPPs, and there were three modalities: one for a new build with operation, another for taking existing facilities, refurbishing them, re-equipping them, and operating them, and then the third for facilities that were already built to be operated alone, or for those entities that already had some existing units to be able to enter on an outsourced basis. So it gave quite a spectrum of modalities. And the task was to put together all the necessary tendering documents so that any health departments at oblasts and cities could readily use them. So instead of each getting an advisor to do the tendering documents for what is a relatively small project, there would be one set of suites of documents, one for each modality, that would take care of the whole lot for all the oblasts and the cities, to provide a clear kind of set of guidance notes per modality, and in essence also to have a financial model that is plug and play, so that the basic data that is needed for the city or the oblast to understand what it's going to cost, what their annual payments need to be, and so on, the financial model would be able to take care of that. And in essence, to test the documents so that eventually they would be used on a what we call a take it or leave it basis, which was the case, for example, in many of the repeat PPPs that we saw, starting, for example, in the UK with the prison contracts, in due course in Canada. A lot of the PPPs that were done very much on a take it or leave it basis because the bankability of it was proven. So the objective, and this is very important to set the context, to have a transformational process. And this was enshrined by a law that was passed in 2016 to transform healthcare, and it's called Densalu, which I'll talk about in a minute. But importantly within that, so the reform was there to turn around the way primary healthcare is delivered. But there was a strong recognition that the public sector wouldn't be able to pull this off. So the idea was to bring private sector expertise through private partnerships into this. And this would then give the right kind of cost-effective and time-efficient way of delivering them. And along the way, two key things. One was to clarify the risk allocation and any mitigation measures. And the second was to introduce quality improvement. And the documentation, there was initially the guidance document to the Hakimats, but then in addition to that, for each modality, three key procurement documents, the RFP document, the tender document, and the PPP agreement template, and then the supporting documents, which were the risk matrix, the KPIs, the financial model, and the manual for using the model. This is a bit of a busy chart. They tend to be, but you can see there that the private partner sits kind of in the middle with the Akimat as the public partner. And they would have, depending on the extent, the type of project, there would be a contractor that will do design and build, whether it's for the new build or the refurbishment. And also they would hire, because this is an integrated PPP, so they're actually delivering all the clinical services. So they would hire the necessary staff, enter into any third-party contracts and so on, and equipment supplies for any equipment and its maintenance. But then when it came to the payment mechanism, there would have to be, and you can maybe just work out the script on the right of that slide, an offtake agreement. Firstly, a capitation payment, so a per capita payment for the enrollees within that catchment area. And that would be a fixed payment in return for a set basket of services. And that basket of services was determined, and it was linked back to the Densalu reforms to say that, yes, primary healthcare is the first port of call for anyone needing treatments. And at the primary healthcare clinic, you would receive XYZ type treatments free of charge based on your insurance. But in addition, the center can charge tariffs for additional services. And these were services that were not covered by the public health insurance. In Kazakhstan, they introduced a mandatory health insurance to top up the state health insurance. And then as far as the centers are concerned, they, of course, automatically have that captive market, because if somebody is enrolled in a center, and they need, for example, a blood test or a scan, an image that is outside of the basket of coverage, then that would be their first choice, provided, of course, the quality was right. There's no obligation to do it necessarily at that center. And that meant the centers, as well as getting the capitation from the government, were also able to enhance their revenues that way. So that was kind of a win-win. Now, and Shemadin can talk some more about this, there was also the possibility for what's called concession facility availability payment. And when I hand over to Shemadin, he'll tell us some more about that. And that would cover things like the cost effectively of the new build or the refurbishment. Now, what's fundamental to this is to grant an exclusivity, because it won't work if a year after starting the initiative or the project, the provider finds that there's another 2 or 3 on their doorstep grabbing away patients and enrolling them, and therefore diluting the catchment market that they have. I'll talk a bit more about KPIs in a minute, but KPIs were really intrinsic to this, and it was the way that the government, the Ministry of Health, could actually assure quality. When we looked at KPIs, we looked very broadly at KPIs in different countries in primary healthcare and how they were assessed and measured. We looked at the Donabedian method to evaluate what the KPIs should be and how they would be measured and tracked and so on. What's interesting is that although there were some KPIs in the Kazakh system, they weren't looked at, they weren't monitored. And that, of course, is a crucial thing when it comes to public-private partnerships. And the last point to mention on that is that data digitization and telemedicine are fundamental to this type of a program, because the way this would need to be created, given the access to healthcare for people in rural areas, there would have to be configuration along the lines of a hub and spoke system. And that means really using technology so that a patient in a rural area can be seen by a specialist on a telemedicine basis. And then that specialist would have also opportunity to go around the different rural centers to see those patients for follow-ups and so on, or vice versa. This is a sample of the KPI table we did. I know you can't read it, it's very small, but it just shows the kind of detail that these would go into. Now, this all, I'll be handing over to Shemerdan in a minute to take us through the modalities and the various issues and that. But one thing that came out of this type of project is that configuring them as small-scale PPPs actually meant that international investors would not really be interested, because you won't find somebody coming in from another country for effectively a polyclinic and a few satellite clinics. It's just too small for them, which meant the local expertise would need to be developed. And what we advise there is to actually have a program of cultivating the local expertise so that they would step up to the mark and take them on. And the reason for highlighting and outlining all the risks was to make sure that both sides of the party, in terms of the public and the private, had a clear understanding about the risks that they are able to take on board and the remuneration systems and so on. Shemerdan, I'll pass over to you. I'll go off camera and I'll continue driving the presentation, and I'll come back to talk about the final lessons of it.
Thank you, Nasser. For some reason, I cannot switch on the camera because organizer shall do it. But anyway, okay, now I can do it. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Nasser, and thank you, WAP, for this opportunity. So briefly about modalities, I shall try to be brief. Basically, there are 3 modalities, and the difference basically is the level of responsibility which is passed to the private partner. One of the modalities requires just refurbishment and re-equipment. So basically, there is no construction involvement. Second one is integrated modality, which involves some responsibility for the construction of the facility. And the third one is so-called management contract, which basically the legal framework is equivalent of trust management agreement. So this is just a very high level brief description of 3 different modalities. And if we go further, we move further to the next slides, please. Again, this this table is self-explanatory. It just shows the allocation of risks. Again, this is quite standard and self-explanatory. So just to make reiterate the main points which Nasser already mentioned. So Kazakhstan is a good case study of small-scale PPPs. Why Kazakhstan is a good study? Because in Kazakhstan, there is for quite a long of time the idea of so-called program PPPs. So basically, program PPP is a fast-track procedure for replication of certain types of projects. Most of them so far have been planned to be implemented as again as a program PPP, basically a replication without a need to proceed through bureaucratic procedures based on certain specific legal framework, which is basically fast-track procedure, so-called again program PPP. So far, this legal framework has been enacted only for the healthcare in 2019. But again, in theory, on paper, there is already this legal framework. In practice, it has not been implemented. And now, just recently, Kazakhstan government announced that they want to proceed actually with this program PPP, and hopefully it will be this time implemented, and small-scale PPPs will become reality in the social sector, that are schools and again primary health care facilities. But I will talk a little bit about more successful story about small-scale PPPs that are renewable energy projects. In Kazakhstan, again, there are two different models for large-scale renewable energy projects and for small-scale renewable energy projects. Two different, in effect, two different frameworks. So the benefit of small-scale PPPs framework in Kazakhstan in particular is, if to be brief, it enables Kazakhstan government to achieve the sustainable development goals. The paradox which Kazakh case study shows is that so-called just energy transition can be achieved and can be secured only through small-scale projects if we talk about renewable energy. If we proceed with big, large-scale renewable energy projects, I'm talking about more than 1 gigawatt, the risk is that this would be, in the end of the day, not environmentally or socially beneficial for all relevant stakeholders. So this is it. I think I managed to stay within time limits. Thank you.
Thanks, Shamerdan. So yes, in terms of lessons learned from this, there's quite a few, as you can see. First of all, this was really about implementing healthcare reform that was much needed in the country to really bring primary healthcare as the central port of call for managing all of the conditions, whether they're acute or chronic. And configuring that doesn't lend itself to being configured as a large-scale PPP, because what you're talking about are a series of small facilities, some of them already existing, some of them existing but needed to be refurbished and so on. Some needed to be built new because there were catchment areas, particularly in new urban settings, where there weren't any facilities, that the social infrastructure had not caught up with the general urban development. So this showed that bringing the private sector can result in bringing that expertise and know-how and the speed of implementation. Secondly, using them on a small-scale basis and bringing in the program PPP method actually meant that you could come up with a suite of documents and go through a training program with those that will be applying them and using that to roll it out. So you're then effectively recruiting, if you like, an army of tens of oblasts and cities that can go out and do their own, which then doesn't create the same bottleneck as you might if you had a major one PPP. Now, the small-scale PPPs are also, and we see this in several of the case studies that have been delivered so far, they bring a lot more social benefit and local development and also sustainability into the system. And by tapping in further into the supply chain that is localized, that really adds to it. I mentioned KPIs, and this isn't only about small-scale PPPs. It's actually about what we would call service-based PPPs, some of which are small, but some of which can be big. KPI setting is important. It requires a lot of engagement, and the monitoring of it and also the baselining of it is quite fundamental. So this kind of comes back to the theme of utilizing private sector partners as change catalysts, and then putting in the government reforms that allow the private sector to engage is also quite an important thing. And that becomes like one of the key drivers that can suck in the private sector to participate in things that would traditionally have been outside of their domain. What I'm referring to here as market cultivation is basically building the supply market. And we've seen this now in several sectors and several settings, where if the market is quite nascent in terms of the supply, traditionally there has just not been a private sector supply market. What the government needs to do is to start building that and start bringing that on board in small steps, so that by the time they need to do a project that is all-encompassing, small or large, supply market can be for them to utilize. And of course, that program PPPs offer repeatable transactions at significantly lower transaction costs. And at the same time, program of education, public relations and awareness is important. And we would always recommend that these things are piloted before they're taken on board on a larger scale. And this brings us to an end of our presentation. Thank you very much. Kieran, back to you.
Thank you, Nasser, very much for this detailed presentation you took us through. I think now it is time for the last presentation in the session today. I will now introduce Samantha Sugar. She is a civil engineer with a completed CP3P, which is APMG Public-Private Partnerships Certification Program. And she has MBA with emphasis on PPPs. She is an experienced project finance professional, and she has been managing PPP projects since 2019. Over to you, Samantha.
Thank you, Kiran, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to share my screen, and please let me know if there is some problem of viewing. So I'm going to start by telling a little bit about Caixa. So Caixa is a public bank in Brazil, and it was founded in the 1861. We are a government-owned financial institution, and we are the 4th largest bank in Latin America. So it's just to show our size in relation to the market. And we have more than 8,000 employees. So our ongoing projects, we have 75 projects in portfolio, and we go from child education projects, street lighting, social housing, sanitation, and youth rehabilitation centers. Today, I'm going to talk about a project that we finished last year. It's a project of solid waste PPP for a group of municipalities. So we have this project. It's in a state in Brazil called Ceará. And we had some challenge there. I'm going to talk about the challenge we had and the lessons we could learn from it. So the first lesson and the first challenge is the scale of the project. So we have here in Brazil more than 5,000 municipalities. So we have a challenge of giving the projects, having viability at the projects. So this first challenge was about the scale of this project. And we had to group together a few municipalities to make the project viable. So in Brazil, we had a new legislation about regionalization. The law requires that the municipalities work together. It was made in order to make the projects viable and to make the municipalities make a better project together. So here in this project, we ended up with 8 municipalities together to make the solid waste project viable. So it's called the Consortium Comares. It was a project with $23 million capex estimated. We had more than 300,000 people in these municipalities and more than 237 benefit collectors, rag pickers. I hope the term is correct. And when we talk about the contract value, it's all the revenue of the contract, which was, I think, for 30 years. So at the bidding process, we had a 15% discount at the tariff that was established. So just to give an example in the impact in the tariff, because of the scale, we had one scenario that we had 350,000 people, and there was an average bill per user of $2.50 a month for user, which for here in Brazil, and in particular in this area of this consortium, it's an area with in which the population has a lower possibility to pay for an additional bill in the public service, about a public service. So with a population of 350,000, we have the $2.50. But if we improve the population or gathering together more municipalities in 640,000 people, we would have less 40% of the average bill per user. So the scale economies were very huge for the sector, especially here in this area, because it's not in the center of Brazil. So it would be very beneficial for the project that we gather more municipalities together. We had more scenarios, and at the end, at the beginning, I think we had 10 municipalities, and at the end, we had 9, or it was 9 at the beginning and 8 at the end. So another challenge was the absence of permanent qualified technical staff to monitor the project at the municipality. I think here in Brazil, it's maybe a more common situation that we find at the municipalities, because we have very small municipalities with very small teams. So Caixa provided the technical support during the structuring process, and we made also the knowledge transfer during the project structuring and contract management phase, so as the team at the municipalities could make the management of the contract. So we have, during the structuring process, a weekly schedule with the municipalities teams in order to talk about the projects and the decisions. And we have in the contract that is going to be to be executed during the concession. We have an obligation for the private partner to make knowledge transfer annually for the municipalities team. Besides that, we have some actions of Caixa in order to help these municipalities. So we have a course of public-private partnerships and concessions that is available online. And we have two guides, one of solid waste and another one of public lighting that are available also for everyone. And the municipalities can use it to structure their own project and also during the management of the contract. So these are the two guides. Another challenge that we have was the absence of current user billing. It's a situation for solid waste in the majority of the municipalities in Brazil. So it's not common to charge the population for the solid waste service. So it's a barrier we have to surpass. So the co-billing with other public service is a strategy that we use in some projects, usually with the water service. So it's easier for the population to accept this co-billing than to accept a new billing for a new service. And the other one is the value perception by the public managers and the population. So we have a very huge challenge with the mayors, that especially in near the elections, because they don't want the political problems that comes with a new billing of a service. And for some services, it's easier to see the value in the service. And sometimes in the solid waste, it's not very easy to see, because it's usually the landfill, it's very far from the city. A lot of people don't even know how it works. So it's not a problem you see, unless it's a problem with the collecting, the picking of the solid waste in the door of your house. So the value perception by the public was a thing in the project that we tried to change with a robust communication plan with the population and with the legislative of these municipalities in order to present the project and be more evident which were the gains for the population and for the municipalities in order to be easier for them to accept the new tariff. So another challenge that we faced was the solid waste management status quo. So we have a situation here in Brazil that we have some companies that historically work in this kind of sector. And we have also the recyclable collectors that are involved in the process of the solid waste. So for the recyclable collectors, we involve them in the process of the structure. So when we are structuring the project, we talk to the municipalities in order to model the project, but we call them the recycle collectors to get involved and to contribute in defining which is going to be their role in this project. So they are very participative of the process. We can model the project in order to accommodate the local situation. So we have different situations in different municipalities, and we can accommodate that in the project. And it's very important because we have a law in Brazil, it's the Solid Waste National Politic, and it says that the collectors should be involved in the process, and it's an obligation that they are included in the collecting. But sometimes it's not considered in other projects, and for us it's a premise that we can and we should involve them in this conversation to model the project. And another thing is the initiative to improve their work conditions. So in the process of structuring, we talk to them. They are involved in the process, and we can diagnose what's needed for them. So sometimes it's going to be some investment, CapEx investment. Other times it's going to be a different way of working. So it depends on the project, and it depends on how organized are them. Here in Brazil, we have different levels of these recyclable collectors, how they are organized in each place. So some places we have a bigger organization, and then they can do more of the work of separating, of recycling. And in other places, they are still trying to get structured, to get organized. So in these places, we are going to offer a different solution. So the thing here about the status quo is divided again and involving the recyclable collectors, and also in being able to change the situation that is historically happening. So besides that, the project Comares was very successful. We had a very huge company interested in the project, and it's been a success project during the last year, during the beginning of the concession. The indicators of the contract are being, they are okay, they are within what was predicted in the contract. And for us, it's a model of success because of the viability of the project. And together with another project that we had, which was Convale, with another group of municipalities, they were the two first cases of solid waste concessions here in Brazil. And we use them as models for our ongoing projects. We have, like, at the moment, 14 ongoing projects. And these two first were the models that we use it to build up on right now. So we discuss the lessons learned here, and we try to improve the contract for the new projects that are still going on. So our focus here in Brazil is, here in Caixa in Brazil, is to provide this technical assistance to the municipalities, because they usually don't have this kind of team, specialized team. And we try to help them to make the PPP projects that are needed. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. That has been a very detailed presentation for your project. And now it is the time I would like to invite all the panelists to share their insights. We'll have a round of questions. Each one will get about, let's say, 3 minutes. And apart from the challenge which you handled in your projects, the challenge will be to talk your biggest insight in these 3 minutes. So the first question I'll be trying to do.
Sorry, Kiran, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I apologize for interrupting, but I couldn't get my camera to work to come on screen. I wanted to say something.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Here we go. Okay. I just wanted to say thank you very much to our panelists, of course, and tell our audience that there are some questions about what we consider to be small-scale PPPs. And this is something we defined in session 1 of this program. And really, mainly, small-scale PPP has to do with the size of the project compared to the cost of preparing it. So if the cost of preparing that project makes it, not efficient, or then it is a small-scale PPP. This is the main criteria. Of course, there are other criteria as well, but this is the main hurdle. And the other one being the lack of awareness and expertise at the local level for municipalities to carry out those projects. But the other point I wanted to make is that here today, we have, in this third session on case studies, we have 3 different ways of dealing with small-scale PPPs. And these are ways that we have talked about in previous sessions. But here it is nice to see real examples of those. So we have seen an example of philanthropy, how philanthropy can do small-scale PPPs. We have seen an example of program PPP, which is something we're really advocating very strongly for PPP units to engage in programs, and we invite all PPP units and PPP professionals to learn more about this. And I think Nasser's presentation has been amazing, and Shemerdin also in that sense, much to learn from it. Of course, this will be distributed. And the third way is what Samantha Schuber has presented, which is sometimes a project might be, a municipality or community might be too small to accommodate a project, even if you try your best to minimize the costs. And so therefore, it becomes an option to group together a group of municipalities. And here, the responsibility of the PPP unit is to be the catalyst for bringing these communities together, because most often, I would say, they would not come together by themselves because they don't know, they don't have the expertise, they're not aware of how this can be done, etc. So I think this is the importance of today's session, is that we have highlighted 3 different ways of approaching the problem. And I'll stop here and give back to the floor to our panelists. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ziad, for that summary and addressing the fundamental question of how to arrive and definition of small-scale PPPs. With that context, Ziad, now I will move over to our panel discussion. An idea is to have one question which could be a common thread among all the case studies. And the request to all the panelists is to come out with the biggest insight on that question in 3 minutes each for you. And the first question I'm thinking of is that when the case study we're talking means the project was a success and you were the reason for that success. While it is now a satisfaction and a feeling good factor, but at the beginning you were going through a lot of challenges. So if you have to come out with the biggest challenge of your learning from that case study, what would you talk about it? Of course, Samantha talked about various different challenges and takeaways, but now the question is to talk about the major takeaway in terms of what was the challenge. And I think we'll go in the same sequence. David, first to you.
Thank you, Kalan. Well, the challenge for us in trying to take something that's been done somewhere else and replicating it was that things are different in different states in the U.S. and different countries, certainly. And so looking at how we could adapt that process to the rules and policies in Louisiana versus Texas was a real challenge. And then the other issue, of course, was the prohibition from FEMA, and we actually had to take that all the way to the FEMA administrator at the time. And I want to put a qualifier on this, Kalam, because that was done by the FEMA director, back in 2016. I don't know that has not been changed. I don't know. So I would ask anyone, I know there's several people from the United States on this call that were interested in this, someone I think from my neighboring state of Mississippi. So I would ask that you first check with FEMA and make sure that that's still the case. But certainly it was a real challenge to overcome a policy, a federal policy. But in the end, it worked out, and it was again a very effective alternative to what had been happening before, and using a PPP to do it was the icing on the cake.
Okay, thank you. Nasser, what would you say?
I think the challenges with working on any kind of novel first time round type PPP, whether it's small scale or large scale, is actually getting the engagement and the understanding from the government side. Because in a way, you're taking them through a very steep learning curve. In this situation, there was a directive at the time by Minister Bertano It was very forward-looking, really looking. I mean, you get the primary healthcare right in a health system, a lot of things fall into place, surprisingly. But there's a lot of resistance to such a thing because everybody is losing their fiefdoms. And you're really talking about a very complex situation. So of course we felt the resistance. And that's always a challenge, but it's not, I wouldn't say this is peculiar to small-scale PPPs. I think whenever you're trying to do something for the first time in any country, and may not even be confined to PPPs either. Shemed, what would you say was a challenge?
Thank you, Nasser. Yes, I fully agree. I fully agree. I think, again, Kazakhstan is really interesting case study of how not to do some things and how so we can learn from each other. And again, there are great prospects in terms of development of infrastructure, public infrastructure, and healthcare in particular in Kazakhstan. And right now, I think finally, at last, Kazakh government seems to be serious in terms of implementation of PPPs by way of so-called program PPP. So again, let's see how it's going to work in practice, but prospects quite bright, I think.
Yeah, I think in nutshell, the resistance and the engagement is what I could see as a challenge coming out of your case study. And Samantha, what would you mark as the primary challenge for your type of project you handled?
For us, I think the primary challenge would be to overcome the resistance from the population to a new tariff, a new service that's being built on them, and to overcome the electoral cycle, which means the resistance from the politics, the mayor and other politicians that are involved to implement this tariff. So it's our most difficult problem, and it sometimes can pause a project and make it be delayed, or even cancel a project because they don't want to go forward with the new tariff for the population.
Yeah, I think the user fee, what we call in the context of PPPs, is the challenge when, especially in the social sector, where traditionally these services are considered to be free for the ordinary people, and telling them that this is something which needs a cost and service needs a fee to be paid, and it is a very socially politically critical subject and sensitive subject. I know that is a challenge. Uh, in context of the same challenge, taking it to the next step, while we talked about a project as a concept, a user fee, or David mentioned about a policy level challenge, or Nasser mentioned about getting the going from the government side. Moving to the next level, well, we talk about the structuring of the project, how we are structuring the commercial obligations, risk between the partners. In David's case, there was a philanthropic money involved. In Nasser's and Samantha's case, government money is involved. And in that context, it is very important to know how we are sharing the risk and responsibilities, risk and returns between two sides, government or philanthropy or the private sector side. So from that perspective, when we are talking about scalability or replicating the same success in other projects, how would you have dealt differently with the risk sharing of the project? So in David's case, there was a risk sharing. In everybody's case, there was a risk sharing. So now let's start the discussion on the concept of risk sharing and how to essentially negotiate with the counterparty on agreeing those changes in the structuring of the project. David, what would you like to share your insight on?
Well, a couple of things that are important to clarify. The nonprofits in this situation did not invest money. What they invested was time and expertise. And that qualifies in the U.S. Under federal guidelines. If you give of time and expertise, you can monetize that for purposes of matching grants. So the grant came from HUD through the state. HUD's Housing Urban Development Federal Program through the state of Texas. And the match was in-kind services and expertise, the coaching of people so that they were able to afford a home. The design and the development of that entire system was borne by the nonprofit philanthropic groups. But the other part was the private sector, wherein the financial institutions agreed to invest additional loan loss reserve that they are required to do when they are taking on projects that have more risk or financing that has more risk. So they volunteered to increase their loan loss reserve so that they were able to finance these houses, without having regulatory backlash. So it was a really complicated mixture, but it was also, I think, the one thing that we could do better is ensuring that the people that are, and this is one thing that they did right in that situation. We struggled with that in replicating that, is ensuring that you're getting to the people that need it most. Theirs was a contained neighborhood, and it was very easy to see who they were and what they needed. In Louisiana, it was a much more widespread disaster. It was statewide. So there was an issue there of identifying exactly who was and prioritizing the need. So there are always complications, but again, if you're creative and you bring people together, you can often come up with solutions.
Okay, thank you. Nasser, what would you like to share on this topic?
I mean, I think the subject matter of the case study, primary healthcare clinics, it's not a particularly sexy product. Every politician likes to go and cut a ribbon on a really big hospital, a lot of beds, and talk about that. And of course, everybody sings from the same hymn sheet then, because the developers want big money, the project finance banks want big money, everybody wants something big, and therefore everyone wants to run away. But actually, the social impact of the reform that fixing your primary healthcare can achieve is huge. And I think this is where this conundrum comes in terms of how do you propel a program like this in the face of a lot of actually adversity and resistance that's coming your way. One of the interesting ways of unlocking it, and this really came out from talking to some of the existing entities in Kazakhstan, both I think in Almaty and in Astana, who already were providing primary healthcare on an outsourced basis, because there was some kind of small pilots being done at the time. They actually felt that it wasn't about the money they were necessarily making from the capitation payments. So these were like the guaranteed revenues. If you had, say, I don't know, 5,000, 6,000 enrollees, 10,000 enrollees coming in, then the government would pay per enrollee. And then, that enrollee might never turn up for the whole year, because a teenager might be one of your enrollees and they just don't need any healthcare services. But if they were children, if they were elderly, they would obviously consume a lot more. But then they could only consume within a basket. But what they also found is that there are a lot of things that weren't covered. So, for example, day surgeries. So some of them actually started to implement day surgeries. Some started to put in some ultrasound equipment that wasn't covered, and therefore they could do some ultrasound activity and make some extra revenue out of that. And these were things that people either had to pay for out of pocket or had to utilize their mandatory health insurance, which was a private insurance people had to take out to supplement what the state was willing to give. And I think we need to see all of this in the context of the SDG 3 and achieving universal healthcare and equitable access and so on. And it's not going to be achieved by creating more big hospitals that you cut a ribbon to open with. It's really going to be achieved much more by providing a very well thought out solution to your healthcare needs and addressing these.
I think it's a very interesting point, and you put it very interestingly, that the primary healthcare was not attractive, so to say. And not only primary healthcare, all these small scale PPPs, for that matter, are not being found as very attractive for anybody to now get into. And that's where I think Ziad said the context. The WAP's entire year is now dedicated to the subject of small scale PPPs. And I think we are getting enough eyeballs now with the WAP's effort. There is series of webinars coming on the subject. People like you are contributing to this discussion, and I think we are making this now make a little more attractive than it was traditionally there. And the things like social sector, especially the primary healthcare, has always been very important in the economic progress of the country. So, like China, for that matter, before it liberalized and opened up the economy, 20 years before that they started reforms in the primary healthcare and the primary education. So the importance of primary healthcare, for that matter, cannot be really underestimated. Now I think over to you, Samantha, on that structuring of the project and negotiations with the counterparty.
So we, as I said, we had two projects, two consortium projects of solid waste, and we have an initial model for each of them, following the PPP guidelines, the international guidelines that we know in the guides and everything. And now I think we are trying to optimize this, because for one side, we had some public parties that they weren't used to some risks, even though the risk should be allocated to them. So from one part, we have to really explain and try to clarify why this risk should be allocated to the public part. And to the other side, we already identified some risks that are allocated to the private part, and that shouldn't be, because it would be better treated in another way. So I think in the present moment, we are trying to optimize the risks sharing structure that were established in the first projects, and we are trying to debate more with the private parties. So we're trying to be proactive in this kind of conversations, and having this kind of conversations in order to hear the market and understand what risks are spooking. I'm not sure it's the right word, but are spooking the private parties from some projects. So I'm talking about solid waste, but we had a recent case in Brazil. It was another kind of project, and it wasn't our project, but it didn't have any bidders in the first try, in the first attempt. So we are trying to understand why this happened, because it wasn't a very complex project. So it's a question if it was like the risk structure, or it's a market moment, or a pocket problem, or anything that is related to each part of the contract and to the structure. So it's time for us to optimize the structures that we used in the first projects.
Oh yeah, I think the optimization and learning and going forward, improving the structures is the way to get more projects done on the ground. With those couple of questions as a panel discussion, I think now it is time coming to address specific questions from the audience. And first question will be more like a general question to all the panelists. Any one of you can actually contribute to it. And that question I'm picking more because it underpins the entire concept of small scale PPPs, what Ziad just mentioned, that the small scale PPPs, the parameter is not absolute, but the parameter is more relative. So the relative to the cost of the project, how the cost of transaction, if I really call it, is looking like. So the cost of transaction as a percentage is appearing to be much more prohibitive to undertake the project. Then the question is specifically here from the audience is, what are the ways in which we can optimize or reduce this cost of transactions so that in effect the project will become much more viable than it was. So anyone can throw some light. What could be the tips for the practitioners and the policymakers to make the cost of transactions for a small scale PPP attractive? How to reduce this cost of transactions?
I think, first of all, don't reinvent the wheel. You know, if you've got some bankable deals, then we can use the precedent of them. You know, I see this all the time. I mean, we know that the parties are going to settle here, and we've got so many bank deals here, and yet the government wants to start here. You know, seeing if they can nudge them a little bit. But we know, I mean, the banks think the same. You know, there's not going to be a bank that's going to think anything other than where they are. Oh. So don't reinvent the wheel.
I think one more takeaway from the Samantha's case could be if we can do a consortium of smaller projects and make it a combination of smaller projects into a big project, then we will actually can help smaller governments, local governments to optimize the costs. And I think, David, you have been votary of using technology. So is there any way we can use technology to optimize some of these transaction costs, some studies, some assessment, due diligence, or whatever different things?
Gosh, I hate to even bring these two letters up, but I know that this is going to have an influence over time on the ability to do smaller PPPs, because so much of the transaction cost is in things that AI may be able to do at some point. I'm not saying now, but that's the direction that we're going, and we all know that. The real question is, can you justify the benefit in a way that, even if the cost is a little much compared to the size of the project, the benefits, and I certainly can talk to that regarding resilience, because you're saving property, you're saving economic activity, you're saving lives and livelihoods. But I think in any PPP, you have to look at what are the benefits, what is the value for money, and what is the value for people, and that's where the next generation PPPs is really going. So I think that there are a lot of ways. I mean, I really love the idea of combining several small ones, so that you have one transaction. Hats off to Samantha for that, because I think that's a real solution.
Yeah.
If I may, Kiran, just add. Of course, this is why we're showcasing these experiences, combining. What is the right word, Samantha?
Well, for us here, it's regionalization. But it would be the group of municipalities.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Grouping, let's say. Also, of course, programs are a great way to reduce that cost, because in a program, you're supposed to be using some standard documentation, boilerplate that is repeatable. I would add to this that technology is improving very quickly. There are companies like Ansarada, which is one of our members in WAP, that automates the whole process of tendering. Oracle has some solutions, and AI is now providing more and more solutions. That's another thing is to be practical. As Nasser said, it's like, what is it that the bank wants? So it's not just going by the book. I've said this many times. You don't need a bank is not going to require you to do an environmental impact assessment for street lighting project. I can guarantee that. So don't go by the book and do all the checklist of things that might not be needed. And lastly, I would say, be practical about tendering. There are many types of projects today. If you create a program, you don't need to tender them as such. The price is known. The price at any point in time of producing a kilowatt hour from solar energy in a particular country is known. Just say this is the price that the government is willing to pay, or that, whatever, and then whoever wants to build a solar farm can go do it, as long as they go through the process and have complete the standard documentation of the program, etc. But you don't need to do tendering and presenting bids and competitive issues all the time. We need to think about things differently. So I'll stop here.
Yeah. I think that's an important point, Ziad, you mentioned in the context of PPP tendering, what we call it. Traditionally, the thought process of the government officers is to do input specification. So you do big documents and specify all the inputs, and then there is a challenge of how to measure that. Versus there's an output specification, what as you just mentioned. We want to procure the electricity at this rate and just give us the electricity. I need not measure your input, and then there is a monitoring mechanism and reporting mechanism. I think the changes in the procurement are happening strategically, and that can be optimized using technology, as you mentioned. There's a bit of security or the issue of entire replacement of PPP professionals by AI. So we may not need people to write probably some feasibility reports. You can just input the project type, and the report will be given by the AI. But that movement aside, I think in the similar thread, the next question is coming, which is very specific, and that is actually addressed to Samantha. Now that we are talking about clubbing or clustering the municipal corporations together to make it a sizable project, how the governance was addressed, the subject of governance, sharing of this revenue among these municipalities and reporting. So the question to you, Samantha, is specifically the governance part of dealing with these 8 to 9 municipal corporations in a cluster or in a combination manner.
So since the municipalities are together in a consortium, and we make the meetings, the meetings, the recurrent meetings of the project with this team of the consortium, they organize themselves, and we help them with some questions, with some key questions. But they organize themselves. They already have some kind of governance inside the consortium. Sometimes we have to help them with some things, but usually they already have this kind of governance inside their organization. So usually this kind of consortium here in Brazil, they do tender process together for buying for simpler contracts, and the PPP usually is the first complex one, the first complex contract. So they already have a governance, and we use that they already have. We use that for the PPP. And just another point, since we have for solid waste, we have the tariff-based, the user tariff billing based contract. It's not necessary that the consortium has to put money on the PPP. So it's one less problem.
Okay, thank you. So I think before I now give to Ziad for conclusion remarks, one quick question for Nasser. How easy and difficult it would be to scale up or replicate these PPPs in other regions in the primary healthcare domain?
Yeah, I mean, you come back to the starting point, because you need to have the enabling policy or law and so on to actually undertake this kind of implementation. If your question is about implementing an identical kind of thing with primary healthcare, then yes, I mean, you'd need that enabling environment and the right reforms to be in place, so that you know what you're targeting by way of services, spread and so on of the primary healthcare clinics. And then to come up with a scheme, because in some countries have approached primary healthcare differently than others. So in some you will find what's called a polyclinic, which is like a more comprehensive center that does a lot more. And some countries just don't have those. So you'd have to come up, for this to work, really, you need to come up with this hub and spoke model. So provided you get that kind of baseline out of the way, then, looking, I mean, the three modalities I think apply across the board. Then it's going to be a combination of new build where you're lacking facilities, refurbishment where the facility is good, is just about good enough but needs an enhancement and certainly needs re-equipping, and somewhere where you can just do management contracts. I think that the fourth dimension, which we didn't look at because there weren't that many of them in Kazakhstan, was what we call the private sector participation, where you go to existing facilities and buy services from them. And that, we see that, for example, happening in dialysis and in other types of clinical services. And that can be a fourth dimension. But once you get those in place and you hire the right, somebody with experience to put these documentations together, the rollout then should just follow from those. Yeah, it's repeatable, certainly.
Okay, thank you. I think thank you very much for all the attendees to be active on the chat box and panelists. I will now move over to Ziad for his insight and concluding remarks. You are on mute.
Well, can you hear me now? Okay. I was saying, Kiran, thank you very much for this great moderation today. Thank you for Samantha and David and you for spending your morning with us, and Shaimerdan in Hong Kong for spending his evening with us. I'm personally in Nepal, and we're going to be looking at many small-scale PPPs in Nepal as well. Hopefully we'll have some other things to tell you in the coming sessions. Reminder, next week we have at the same time a PPP session in French language, which is going to be mainly about the regulatory aspects and other related matters. And the Friday after, we switch back to English again, and we will have another exciting session. Please stay tuned. Also, next Friday, actually, we have two sessions. We have a session in French for small-scale PPPs, but immediately after, we have a session that is for real estate and urban development. It's going to be in English, but real estate and urban development is a major thing, PPP, for many, many countries, for redeveloping city centers, for housing projects, for all kinds of things. And of course, some of that is small housing. I mean, social housing projects, some of it is even small scale. But next week, it's really about developing major projects, whether it be tourism or urban development or other things. Please stay tuned. We have a lot of very interesting programs, and thank you very much again for being with us today.
Thank you, Ziad.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.